Hey everybody, this is going to be a recap of Lesson 10 or a front loading of Lesson 10 depending on when you're watching this. So you are going to definitely need graph paper, pencil, or a pen. And if you also have already been through Lesson 10, you might also want to have the Desmos Activity open that we did. Lesson 10 is on connecting equations to graphs. And I'm going to go through this series of slides from the Desmos assignment. All right, so here was something that we were looking at. We were looking at graphing games and rides. And I want you to notice that I've got a graph. And on the y-axis, right here, you're going to notice that we have the number of rides. And on the x-axis over here, we've got the number of games. So we want, obviously, to let the number of games x and the number of rides y. So we know, or we are given, that we have an equation of x plus y equals 20. So again, x is games, y is rides. What is the number of rides the student could get on if they don't play any games? So, if they play no games means what? That x is equal to 0, because we know that games are x. And so that means if I substitute 0 in for x right there, what does that mean? It means that if I substitute and go 0 plus y equals 20, well then that y is equal to 20. So if y is equal to 20, it's right up here. So that means that I can go on 20 rides. So if I play no games, then I can go on 20 rides. Now, you also know in the previous slides, as part of this activity, we know that 20 was how much money I had to spend. So 20 was the amount of money. All right, so let's look at the next slide that we were asked to take care of. And that was that, okay, well, same exact situation. We know that number of games is x down here. And the number of rides is y right over here. And now we're saying, okay, same equation, x plus y is equal to 20. And what happens if the number of games, if I don't ride any rides? So if I don't ride any rides, so that means over here on this axis. So if I don't ride any rides, that means that y is 0. So how many games can I play? Well, again, I'm going to go x plus y is 0, right? Because we haven't played any games. We haven't gone on any rides, is equal to 20. Therefore, x is equal to 20. So what does that mean? I can play. What's the number of games the student not could get on that they can play? They can play 20 games. All right, so again, I want to remind you that x plus y equals 20 means I've got $20 to spend. That's what it means. All right, let's go on. All right, so now look at, there's the equation. And there's the graph of the equation. So it's saying that this graph represents x plus y is equal to 20. It also says, again, we're letting the number of games x and the number of rides y. So right here, here's y, here's x. All right, and we've got this equation, x plus y. And now it's asking us to figure out the slope. So this is where that other video that I posted would be good. So I want to make sure that I am going to quickly go through it on this slide, but I also want to reference the video I did on the review of slope and y and x intercepts. So if you need to maybe pause this video, go and watch that one, and then come back and do that, do this one, that would be fine as well. All right, so it's asking us to determine the slope of the graph. And then it's saying, how can I use the graph to figure out the slope? So what I'm going to do is I am going to note that when I am talking about the slope on the graph, I'm looking for 2 points. I'm going to draw a bunch of points here. All right. So why did I draw those? Well, because those points actually sit at intersecting points on the graph, which make it really easy for me to determine the graph, to determine the slope of the line. So I'm going to take actually these two right here. So this one and this one in green. And I want you to remember that slope is the rise and the run. And rise, so how much did I go up and how much did I run to get to the next point? So I want you to look at this. If this is 15 right here and I have to rise to get to 20, how many did I rise? I rose 5, right? So if I rose 5 and then how much I rose 5 up. So notice that I said plus 5. And now I'm running to the left. So remember, whenever I run to the left on a number line, I'm running in the negative direction. So how much did I run? Well, take a look down here. I went from 5 to 0. So I ran negative 5. All right, so just to remind you, how did I get negative 5? Well, if this is 0 and this is 5, I ran negative 5 from 5 to 0. I ran to the left. That means I ran on the number line negative 5. So 5 going to 0 means negative 5. So negative 5, that's how far I ran to get back to 0. So now what is my rise? My rise is 5 over my run, which is negative 5. And what's 5 divided by negative 5? Negative 1. So I just used my graph to figure out my slope. So how can I use the graph? I did. I used it by using rise over run. So now, what is my slope? Negative 1. All right? Could I have written 5 over negative 5? Absolutely. Absolutely, I could have written that as well. All right, so now, let's keep going. It says, okay, so now what is the vertical intercept? So, and it says to write it as an ordered pair. So vertical means vertical. Vertical intercept is up and down. This is vertical. So what is the vertical? And this is wrong. This should be y-axis. So there was an error, and I pointed out in the lesson. So basically, when I do this, I am looking at where does my line cross the vertical axis right here. Well, right here, I'm going to draw a big circle around it. So if I think about the ordered pair there, what is the ordered pair? Well, x is 0. And what is y? Y is 20. All right, so there you go. So that's what we covered today in class, or the other day in class, but I wanted to make sure. Okay, so now I'm hoping, again, that made a little bit more sense, that I went over that in detail. All right, so now let's look at this next slide. This next slide says, okay, so now take a look. I've got the line. I see that I've got my y-axis and I have my x-axis. And we've got number of games as x and y is the number of rides. And I want you to note that they've got this space here that's drawn, and you can see this little triangle right here. Well, this little triangle is called a slope triangle, and I never pointed that out in class. And this is called a slope triangle, and what it does is that it's showing the rate of change. And that rate of change is the slope, which we determined to be -1. And if I take a look at it, and I look at if I just look at that little space, well, that's how much something is changing over time. So, what we are supposed to do on this slide is let the number of games X and the number of rides Y, and we've got X plus Y is equal to 20. And now it's saying, hey, we want you to solve for Y. So let's go ahead and do that. And you know how to do that, but now I'm going to just demonstrate it again. So we've got X plus Y. I'm going to do it down here, and I'll do it in a different color. I'll say X plus Y is equal to 20. And remember, how do I solve for Y? I'm going to get Y to stand all by itself on the left-hand side. So I'm going to subtract X from both sides. And when I subtract X from both sides, I get Y is equal to 20 minus X. All right, so I'm going to write it 20 minus X. All right, so we solve for Y, and then it says, what connections do you see between your new equation and the graph? Well, remember what we determined? That slope was -1. And I want you to remember that right here, this number that sits in front of the X value is -1. We don't write -1. It's implied that it's there. So now I see that my slope is -1, and I can easily see that in this new equation. Well, there's a reason for that. And so we've got two forms out here now, right? So it's just that I noticed that -1 is now the slope, and it's sitting in front of the X. I wonder why that is. So let's go on and look at the next slide. So the next slide now is a different situation. So now we have this new situation where we're talking about games and rides, but now I have a different equation right here. And it's saying that now I've got 250x plus y is equal to 15. Well, remember back here when x plus y was equal to 20, remember what the 20 stood for? The 20 stood for the amount of money I had to spend on rides and games. So now look, it says, well, 2.5x plus y equals 15. So now all of a sudden, like, what does this mean? So what do you remember from what we talked about in class? Well, now instead of having $20, I have $15. So I'm going to write 2.5x plus y is equal to 15. Well, now I only have $15 to spend. And what else? Remember, x plus y is equal to 20. Remember that I can ride, if I ride no rides or no game, if I play no games, I can do 20 rides. And if I do no games, I can do 20. I just said that. And if I do no rides, I can play 20 games. And if I don't do any games, I could do 20 rides. Well, in this equation, this means that and this goes back to the very first scenario, that each ride in each game was $1. That's what that meant. Well, now all of a sudden, what do you think 2.5 means? So and what do you think 1y means? So now let's take a look at the question. I'm just throwing all these things out that we talked about in class. So now it says, okay, 2.5x plus y is equal to 15. So what's the number of rides the student can get on if they don't play any games? Well, remember, games is x. This is x. And the rides is y. Right? So if I play no games, that means x is equal to 0. And if x is equal to 0, what does that mean? Well, I'm going to substitute in and go 2.5 times 0 plus y is equal to 15. Well, what's 2.5 times 0? 0. So what does this mean? That means that y is equal to 15. What's the number of rides I could get on? Oh, I can get on 15 rides if x is 0. Wow, that's cool. All right, so now let's go to the next slide. So now take a look. Take a look. They drew the line in for us. And the line now shows that I started 15 when x is 0. So this is when x is 0, I started 15. All right, well, that makes sense, right? So now it says, what's the number of games I could play if I don't ride any rides? So if I don't ride any rides, take a look. If y is equal to 0, that means y is equal to 0. If y is equal to 0, how many rides can I ride? Well, can I read the graph? Yeah, right here. 6. Can I also use the equation? Sure. I can go 2.5 x plus 0 is equal to 15. Remember what I do. 2.5 x is equal to 15. Solve for x. Divide both sides by 2.5. X is equal to 6. Wow, look at that. It's the same exact thing. So I could either use a graph or I can use the equation. Awesome. All right, so let's stop there. I want you to go back and I want you to think about, make sure you got everything down. Okay, so let's see what's on the next slide. And so we still have graphing games and rides. Notice we have the equation there. And it says we've got the same situation, 2.5x plus y is equal to 15. So now it is asking us to figure out the slope. So, and then in parentheses, it says, how can I use the graph to find the slope? So again, what I want to reference is I am going to definitely take a look, and I am going to pick points on the line. In fact, I'm just going to draw them right here. And I am going to figure out what the difference is, right? Remember the rise over the run? To see if I can figure out the slope that way. So again, I'm going to start here. And it doesn't matter where I start. It truly doesn't. I could start here and rise and run. So rise up and run. I can start here and rise and run. It doesn't matter. So pick whatever you like, whatever's easiest. So let's look at this bottom one right here. So if I go from 0 to 5, I've risen 5, right? I've risen 5. And then if I run along the x-axis, I went from 6 to 4. 6 to 4. That's 2. But remember, I'm going in the negative direction, so that's minus 2. So then what is my slope? 5 over negative 2 is what I could write. And it'll tell you that you are correct. All right, so now what is the vertical? Again, vertical means right here, vertical intercept. What is the vertical intercept? Right here. Where does my y line cross? It crosses at 0, comma 15. And remember, it's an ordered pair. So now it's gonna, so I found the slope from reading the graph. All right, so now let's look at this one. It says, okay, so notice they've got this little slope triangle, this rise over run, right? We talked about that. All right, so now let's take a look. Let the number of games, there's my equation. Now it says, hey, let's rearrange this to solve for y. So I'm going to do that right down here. So I have 2.5 x plus y is equal to 15. So now it says, okay, let's go ahead and solve. So I'm going to move that 2.5x over and move it over here. All right, and now I'm going to rewrite this as being y is equal to 15 minus 2.5x. All right, so now I'm going, okay, I remembered from the previous one that this number in front of the x had something to do with the slope. So I'm going to go back here, and I go, but wait a minute. She wrote 5 over negative 2. So look what happens if I write 5 over negative 2 and I divide 5 by negative 2. I get negative 2.5. Oh my goodness, take a look. Same exact thing. So I'm going to rewrite my equation here to be 15 minus 2.5x. And I want you to know, what connections did I notice? Well, that my slope was negative 2.5 and my value in front of the x was also negative 2.5. Oh, and why is it negative? Remember, we read graphs from left to right. It's negative. So, wow, there you go. So pretty cool, right? So I don't think I've got another slide there. So that is putting together the graph, equations, and reimagine how or reconfigure things to make it easier for us to understand. So I could definitely make that happen. So I hope this kind of solidified what we did in class. And again, it makes more sense. If you want to, there are some additional slides as part of the Desmos that you could easily do. So some additional, and I don't want to call them challenge, but I'll call them challenge here. There's some additional slides that if you want to give it a chance to practice some more in Desmos, the slides are there for you to do, but they are not homework. Again, I hope this video helped, and let me know if you have any questions or see me during office hours.